Well, because I began at the wise age of 16, I have worked for the past 28 years in some form or fashion as a youth minister, associate minister, hospital chaplain, or priest. And over the course of that time, I have preached and taught and done so many presentations of one variety or another that I feel like I've become talented at telling when someone is paying attention or not. Jana. You know, I made that joke in every service, and your name got the most laughs. I don't know why. And when people don't pay attention, I don't take it personally, because if I did, my marriage would have ended long ago. Alexis has never heard one of my sermons, but it's true. But what I actually think is I should have given a better introduction. I should, like this one, I should have grabbed their attention right from the start. Anyone who teaches in any form or fashion is going to face the frustration and problem of wondering if people are listening. Even presidents face this problem. Franklin Roosevelt was known for his smile and his larger-than-life personality, and he could dominate whatever space he was in, whether he wanted to or not. But partly because of that larger-than-life personality, he made people nervous, and they didn't know what to say, and they were shaken when they were around him. They were not really listening, he said. And he observed this especially in those long reception lines. He had to endure all the time, just shaking one hand after the other, giving pleasantries, doing that greeting. And he would get tired of smiling and doing the typical greeting. So famously, he decided to play a little trick on his guests after he had greeted about 100, and it seemed there were 200 more to go. He decided he was a little stir-crazy, so he'd have some fun, so he gave him that big smile, and he said, "I ordered the death of my grandmother this morning." And the guests just kept passing through, and every time he said it, they would say, "Well, how lovely." Or, "Continue with your great work, sir." And nobody listened to what he was saying except one foreign diplomat who, when Franklin said that to the diplomat, he leaned over and softly said, "Well, I'm sure she had it coming, sir." Really listening is difficult. Real listening is difficult. And it's understandable if you're around somebody like Franklin Roosevelt, because you're thinking about yourself. Did I dress correctly? Is my hair combed? Did I brush my teeth? Are these the right shoes? Whatever. Your focus is on yourself. And I've noticed that the people who teach and preach or make presentations a lot are some of the worst listeners, because they have trouble taking themselves out of the student or the teacher chair and sitting in the student chair. And they're, like I'm wondering when I hear other people preach, is that how I would have began? Or is that what I would have worn? Certainly not. Or, whatever. We have trouble, the point is, taking our focus off ourselves. We have trouble setting aside our pride. Deep listening, real listening can only happen when we do the work to take the mental focus off of ourselves. Well, in our reading from Nehemiah, they had no trouble listening. They're gathered to celebrate. They've just returned from exile that lasted 70 years. And they came back to a destroyed city, so they began to work to rebuild the walls. And they've just finished rebuilding the walls of the city. Jerusalem is a protected city again. And it happens to be the Festival of Trumpets, also called Rosh Hashanah, which begins 10 days of penance and meditation, commemorates the creation of the world, and it leads up to Yom Kippur, this 10 days of awe. And so the people gathered to hear the scripture proclaimed. Imagine if this occurred here at Emmanuel. Let's say it's not COVID. It's a feast day. We have so many people that have arrived that we have to meet outside. There's not enough space. So we set up a platform. We gather in the parking lot. I stand up to read from the book. And whatever it is that I read, it takes 6 hours. I know what you're thinking. If I had to listen to me read for 6 hours, I would cry too. I had to listen to myself chant that really long psalm just now. I wanted to cry. But in Nehemiah, they're not weeping due to the length. They wanted to listen. For them, hearing Torah was powerful. And they're also trained to listen. Only about 3% of the population of this city is literate at this time. There's little or no access to culture or music or anything of any kind, just oral tradition, because the city's destroyed and they're displaced. Imagine you're back in your ancestral home and you've never been there before. It's been 70 years since someone in your family has been there. And everywhere you look, you see reminders that your people were defeated in war by the destroyed city. And so this is a rare opportunity to gather with everyone, to hear Scripture read after months of hard work and danger, of having to defend workers with swords just so they could complete their work. You get to hear the story of God. In other words, your family, tribal story read. On this day, you have one job. Finally, to soak it in, to reflect, to let the words fill your mind with images. And imagine for these people, this day was like a person who walked through the desert getting to swim in cool water, because their lives had been in danger. They've been working for months, and they need direction and strength and encouragement, and today they find it by hearing the story of their people, by listening. By listening. Have you ever had an experience like this? Maybe you're hearing something said, hearing words that you've heard 1,000 times. Maybe it's part of the liturgy, but for some reason, on this day, they soak in. You hear them for the first time. I only am able to really listen, I've learned, if I can shut off, due to circumstance or work, my inner monologue, that inner critic, my pride, and just really, actually listen. As people of faith, as followers of Jesus, we're called to do that, to listen. And it might be the most difficult thing that we are called to do. But when we learn how to do it, and we're able to sit for hours at a time saying nothing about ourselves or our own agenda, and just listen to what God is saying, to what our neighbor is saying, to what the person who's least like us is saying, then at the very least, we'll be able to have something useful to say when it's our turn to speak. But at the most, we might come into God's presence in the image of God that we see on that person. So how do we do this? How do we listen to God and each other? Can't we just pick up a scroll or a Bible and read it like Ezra did? Well, if this section of Nehemiah provides any lesson for us in knowing how to listen, I would say that we need to begin by listening in community. That's what they did. They gathered to hear the scriptures read. And listening in community reminds us that the thing that we're hearing, scripture, is not our own personal possession to do with as we please. It belongs to everyone. Listening in community reminds us that the burden we sometimes get from scripture is not ours to bear alone, but to be shared with other people. Listening in community encourages us because the responsibility we feel when we hear it isn't ours to bear alone, but can be shared with our community. No one can rebuild a city alone. It's difficult for me to insert my agenda if I'm listening with all of you. It also seems clear from this reading that when we listen together, our listening is improved if we listen in humility. The people who were here, who had returned from exile, were different than the people taken away into exile. The people who had been taken away had spent generations hearing the prophets tell them this destruction was coming because you're not doing justice, you're not treating the poor well, you're not doing the things you need to do. And they said, this will never happen to us because we have God's temple here in our city. It doesn't matter what we do. The prophets have warned them over and over, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. And now these people who have returned from exile have none of those thoughts in their mind. They're able to listen because they know their presence there is a gift of God, and there's no doubt. My point is, humility helps us to listen. The way I learned to listen was through clinical pastoral education. Everyone who goes to seminary and graduates to become a priest has to spend a semester in a hospital doing chaplaincy. And if that was the only thing you had to do, it'd be difficult enough. But you're supposed to, after every meeting with the patient, go to your desk and record everything that was said. What you said, what they said, how they responded. And then you sit down with all the other clinical pastoral education students and you read your reports to each other. And then they question you on everything that you said. Well, why did you say that? Well, it reminded me of whatever. Well, why would you bring that up? This isn't about you, it's about the patient. And after doing that for about 3 months, you start to learn to just show up and shut up. You start to learn that you can go into a patient's room who's really suffering, and that pain is not going to jump up on them and get to you, but you could carry it with them for a little while and hold the burden with them together while you're with them. And the only way you learn how to do that is to stop thinking about yourself. So that's our job.